He was bleeding out on the cold tile of a veterinary clinic, a man whose name alone could silence a room. Nikolai Volkov owned half of Chicago, but tonight he was just a dying man with a deadline. He didn't ask for a priest. He didn't ask for morphine. He grabbed the wrist of the woman stitching him up, a woman hiding secrets darker than his own, and delivered an ultimatum that sounded like a curse. "I need a wife by tomorrow." Most women would have run, but Vivian Clark didn't flinch. She tightened the suture, looked the devil in the eye, and whispered the words that would burn the city to the ground. "Then you'll have to live at my place." This isn't a fairy tale. It's a war. The neon sign above the door buzzed with an erratic, dying hum. Paws and Claws Veterinary Clinic. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and wet dog, a scent Vivian Clark had grown used to over the last 3 years. It was better than the smell of fear, which was what she used to smell like before she changed her name and buried her past in this forgotten corner of South Chicago. It was 2 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. Vivian was wiping down the stainless steel exam table when the back door was kicked in. The noise was like a gunshot cracking through the silence. Vivian spun around, a scalpel already palmed in her hand, a reflex from a life she'd tried to forget. A man stumbled in. He was massive, taking up the entire doorframe, soaked in rain and something much darker. He wore a suit that cost more than the clinic, but the charcoal wool was ruined, slick with blood on the left side of his abdomen. 2 other men, hulking shadows with earpieces, flanked him, dragging him forward. "We're closed," Vivian said, her voice steady. Too steady. "Fix him," one of the guards barked, leveling a suppressed pistol at her chest. "Now!" The injured man waved a hand, a sharp, dismissive gesture. "Put the gun away, Alexei. She's not a threat." He collapsed onto the metal table, his breathing ragged. Vivian moved before she thought, the doctor in her overriding the fugitive. She ripped open his shirt buttons, a gunshot wound. Through and through, missing the liver by an inch, but he was losing blood fast. "I'm a vet," she said, grabbing the gauze and clamps. "I treat golden retrievers, not gangsters. Tonight," the man gritted out, his eyes locking onto hers, "I am a stray dog." His eyes were a startling icy grey, the colour of a winter ocean. Even pale from blood loss, Nikolai Volkov possessed a terrifying gravity. Vivian knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew the Volkov Bratva. They ran the docks, the unions, and the politicians. No anesthesia. Nikolai groaned as she poured iodine over the wound. "I have ketamine," she offered, threading a needle. "No, I need a clear head. Stitch it." Vivian worked with efficient brutality. She cleaned the wound, packed it, and began to suture. The room was silent, save for the rain hammering the roof and Nikolai's controlled exhales. He didn't scream. He barely blinked. He just watched her. He watched her hands, steady and scarred. He watched the way she didn't shake, despite the gun Alexei was still holding loosely at his side. "You're not a vet," Nikolai whispered as she tied the final knot. "And you're not a stray," she countered, cutting the thread. "You're done. Get out." Nikolai sat up, groaning as his abdominal muscles contracted. He checked his watch, a platinum Patek Philippe that was smashed on the face. "What time is it?" 2:15 a.m. "Damn it," he hissed. He looked at Alexei. "The deadline is midnight tonight. If I'm not married by the time the trust executes on my 30th birthday, the seat goes to my uncle. And if my uncle takes the seat, we are all dead bodies." Alexei looked pale. Boss, the arrangement with the senator's daughter, fell through. "She's in rehab." "Find someone else," Nikolai snapped. "At 2 a.m.? Who?" Nikolai looked around the dingy clinic. His gaze landed on the diploma on the wall, a fake one Vivian had bought online. Then his eyes drifted back to her. She was wiping his blood off her hands with a paper towel. She was beautiful in a jagged, exhausted way. Dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, eyes sharp and intelligent, no ring on her finger. "You," Nikolai said. Vivian paused. "Excuse me?" I need a wife by tomorrow, Nikolai said, sliding off the table. He stood to his full height, towering over her, legally bound, no romance, just paper. You do this, and I pay you $5 million. After 1 year, we divorce. Vivian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I'd rather stitch up a rabid pit bull. Leave. 10 million, Nikolai countered. And protection. I see the way you look at the door every time a car passes. You're hiding from someone. Marry me, and the Volkov name shields you. No one touches the wife of the Pakan. Vivian froze. He was sharp, too sharp. She was hiding. Not from the law, but from Arthur Penhaligon, a loan shark from Boston who had promised to take her kidney if she didn't pay her deceased father's debt. She had 3 days left before Penhaligon's trackers found her new address. 10 million? She asked softly. Cash, wired to an offshore account of your choosing. Vivian looked at Alexei, then back at Nikolai. This was insanity. This was suicide. But staying here, waiting for Penhaligon, was a guarantee of death. I have conditions, she said. Nikolai raised an eyebrow. Name them. I don't live in your compound. I don't get involved in your business. And I don't sleep in your bed. Agreed, Nikolai said, buttoning his blood-stained jacket. You can live in the penthouse guest wing. We will appear in public together, nothing more. No, Vivian interrupted. If we do this, we do it my way. If I disappear into your penthouse, Penhaligon, my problem, will think I've been taken or killed, and he'll go after my sister in Vermont to flush me out. I need to be seen. I need to appear normal. Just married. She took a step closer to the Mafia Don, tilting her chin up. If you want me to be your wife, you leave your penthouse. You leave the guards. You come to the real world. Nikolai narrowed his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying, Vivian declared, that if you want a wife by tomorrow, you'll have to live at my place. The silence in the room was deafening. Alexei looked like he was about to choke. The great Nikolai Volkov, living in a studio apartment above a veterinary clinic? Nikolai stared at her for a long moment. Then a corner of his mouth twitched. Fine, he said. Pack a bag, doctor. We have a courthouse to bribe. The city hall clerk, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who smelled of peppermint and cigarettes, didn't look up when Nikolai slapped a stack of $100 bills onto the counter alongside the marriage license application. It was 8 a.m. They were the first ones there. Sign here, Mrs. Gable droned. Vivian's hand hovered over the paper. Vivian Clark. It was a fake name, but it was the one on her driver's license. If she signed this, she was legally binding herself to the most dangerous man in the city. She looked at Nikolai. He had cleaned up. A fresh suit, delivered by a terrified assistant in the parking lot, hid the bandages. He looked like a prince, regal and untouchable. He caught her hesitation. Cold feet, he murmured, his voice low so the clerk wouldn't hear. Just wondering if I should ask for 15 million, she muttered, and signed the paper. By noon it was done. No rice, no cake, no kiss. Just a handshake outside the courthouse that felt more like a business merger than a matrimony. Alexei will drive you to your apartment to collect your things, Nikolai said, reaching for his phone. I have a meeting with the Kaipos. No, Vivian said. She grabbed his arm. His muscles were rock hard beneath the silk blend. You agreed. You live at my place. That means you come with me. Now. Nikolai stared at her hand on his arm. No one touched him without permission. I have a business to run. And I have a cover to maintain. If the neighbors see me come home alone after getting married, they'll talk. The rumor mill in my building is faster than the internet. Get in the car, husband. Nikolai clenched his jaw, but he signaled Alexei. Take us to... Where is it exactly? The flats, 4th Street. Alexei coughed. Boss, that's Moretti territory adjacent. It's not safe. It's perfect, Vivian said. The Morettis won't look for the Volkov boss in a tenement building surrounded by their own low-level runners. Nikolai's expression shifted from annoyance to intrigue. Hiding in plain sight. Bold. He opened the car door for her. After you, Mrs. Volkov. The drive was silent. When the black-armored SUV pulled up to the crumbling brick building with the peeling paint and the fire escape that looked like a rust hazard, Nikolai didn't say a word. He just stared out the window. "4th floor," Vivian said. "No elevator." Nikolai stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. He looked out of place, like a diamond sitting in a gutter. A group of teenagers on the corner stopped talking and stared. "Alexei," Nikolai said, "stay with the car. Bring my bags up." "I'll carry my own bags," Nikolai corrected. "If I live here, I don't have staff." He grabbed the single leather duffel bag Alexei handed him and looked at Vivian. "Lead the way." The apartment was small. Small was a generous word. It was a shoebox. The front door opened directly into the kitchen, which was also the living room. There was a single bedroom, the size of a closet, and a bathroom with a shower that dripped eternally. Nikolai walked in, having to duck slightly to avoid the low-hanging light fixture. He placed his bag on the worn laminate floor. He looked at the chipped countertops, the stack of veterinary textbooks on the radiator, and the cat sleeping on the microwave. "The cat comes with the apartment," Vivian said, locking the deadbolt and sliding the chain across. "His name is Barnaby. Don't touch him, he bites." Nikolai looked at the cat. The cat looked at Nikolai, hissed, and went back to sleep. "There is one bed," Nikolai noted, looking through the open door of the bedroom. It was a double bed, pushed against the wall. "I take the bed," Vivian said, taking off her coat. "You take the couch." Nikolai looked at the couch. It was a lumpy, beige thing that looked like it had survived the 1970s and resented it. "I was shot 6 hours ago," Nikolai reminded her. "And I saved your life 6 hours ago." Couch. Vivian went to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of cheap Pinot Grigio. She needed a drink. She poured a glass and turned around to find Nikolai taking off his jacket. He draped it over a rickety wooden chair. The gun in his shoulder holster glinted in the dim light. "We need ground rules," she said, taking a sip. "Rule 1, Nikolai said, unclipping the holster and placing it on top of the fridge, next to a box of cereal. "No one comes in here. Not your friends, not your sister." "I don't have friends here. That's the point." "Good. Rule 2, he continued, rolling up his sleeves, revealing forearms covered in intricate Russian tattoos. "You don't ask about my work. If I come home late, if I come home bleeding, you patch me up and you say nothing." "Fine. Rule 3, Vivian countered. "You do the dishes. I cook, you clean. We're a working-class couple, remember?" Nikolai looked at the sink full of soapy water. He looked like he was trying to decipher a complex mathematical equation. "I have never washed a dish in my life. There's a first time for everything. Welcome to the real world, Nico." He stiffened at the nickname. "Nikolai." Nico fits the apartment better. Nikolai sounds like he owns a yacht. Nico sounds like he works at the docks. For the first time, a genuine smirk played on his lips. He walked over to her, closing the distance until he was inches away. The smell of expensive cologne and rain overwhelmed the scent of the old apartment. "Very well, Viv," he said, testing the nickname. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating in her chest. "But understand this, I may be sleeping on your couch, and I may be washing your dishes. But I am not a domestic animal. Do not mistake my patience for tameness." Vivian held his gaze, refusing to back down, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm a vet, Nico. I know how to handle wild animals. You don't corner them, and you don't startle them. And what do you do when they bite? You muzzle them." Nikolai laughed then, a dark, rich sound that seemed to make the tiny room feel even smaller. "I think," he said, taking the wineglass from her hand and taking a sip from the rim where her lipstick left a mark, "this marriage is going to be interesting." Suddenly, a heavy pounding on the door shattered the moment. "Open up, NYPD!" Vivian's face went white. It wasn't the police. She knew that knock. It was the rhythm used by Arthur Penhaligon's collectors. She looked at Nikolai. He had already moved, the wine glass set down, the gun from the top of the fridge back in his hand in a blur of motion. "Expecting company?" he asked, his voice devoid of the playful tone it held seconds ago. The killer was back. "It's not the police," she whispered. "It's the reason I need $10 million. Nikolai checked the chamber of his weapon. He looked at the flimsy wooden door, then back at her. "Well, wife," he said coolly, "let's go introduce ourselves." The pounding on the door escalated from a knock to a kick. The cheap wood buckled slightly in the frame. "Last chance, Vivian. Open up or we break it down." The voice was gravelly, impatient. It belonged to Salvatore Rocco, a mid-level enforcer for Arthur Penhaligon, who enjoyed his job a little too much. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Nikolai. The transformation in him was terrifying. The slightly bemused husband in the ill-fitting kitchen was gone. In his place stood the Pakan of the Volkov Bratva. His eyes were glacial, devoid of any human emotion other than calculated violence. He didn't look at her. His entire focus was on the threat on the other side of the timber. He moved with silent, predatory grace, sliding along the wall until he was right next to the doorframe. He motioned for Vivian to stay back in the kitchen area. "Unlock it," he mouthed, pointing to the deadbolt, but leaving the security chain engaged. Her fingers shaking, Vivian turned the deadbolt. The click sounded like a gunshot in the tiny apartment. Immediately the door was shoved open from the outside, screeching to a halt against the short metal chain. Through the 4-inch gap, Salvatore's sweaty face appeared, flanked by another heavy-set man named Barry. "About time, you stupid Salvatore started, shoving his face into the gap. He stopped. He wasn't looking at Vivian. He was looking at a chest covered in white silk and a shoulder holster that held a very serious-looking Sig Sauer. His eyes travelled up, meeting the icy grey stare of Nikolai Volkov. The colour drained from Salvatore's face faster than water from a cracked basin. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You have the wrong apartment," Nikolai said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the floorboards vibrate. It was the voice of a man used to ordering executions over coffee. Salvatore stammered, taking a half-step back. No. This is Vivian Clark's place. We're here for a collection." "Vivian Clark doesn't exist anymore," Nikolai said smoothly. "She is now Mrs. Volkov, and the Volkov family has no debts to street-level loan sharks." Barry, not as quick on the uptake as Salvatore, tried to push past his partner. "Who is this clown, Sal? Move it, big guy, before I—" Barry made the mistake of reaching through the gap to grab Nikolai's shirt. It happened so fast, Vivian barely processed it. Nikolai's hand shot up, not grabbing Barry's wrist, but striking it with the heel of his palm in a precise, vicious upward thrust against the doorframe. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Barry shrieked, yanking his shattered wrist back into the hallway. Nikolai didn't blink. He leaned closer to the gap, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only Salvatore could hear. "Tell Penhaligon that if he ever sends his dogs to my doorstep again, I will return them to him in pieces small enough to mail in an envelope. Do you understand?" Salvatore nodded furiously, grabbing his whimpering partner by the collar. "Yes, sir. Mr. Volkov. Sir. Sorry. Mistake. Big mistake. Go." Nikolai kicked the door shut, throwing the deadbolt back into place. The sound of scrambling footsteps down the hallway faded quickly. Silence returned to apartment 4B. The only sound was Barnaby the cat, who had woken up during the commotion and was now casually eating dry kibble from his bowl. Nikolai turned, slipping the gun back into its holster. He looked at Vivian, assessing her. She was pressed against the kitchen counter, pale but standing firm. She hadn't screamed. He liked that. "Arthur Penhaligon," Nikolai mused, picking up his wine glass again. "He operates out of Boston. Small time. Mostly gambling debts and squeezing shopkeepers. He's big enough to ruin my life, Vivian said, her voice trembling slightly as the adrenaline left her system. I owe him 200,000. My dad's gambling debt. Nikolai took a sip of wine, unimpressed by the sum. Chump change. But now, it's a matter of principle. He insulted my wife. Vivian let out a shaky breath. We've been married for 4 hours. You don't have to pretend to be offended. Nikolai walked toward her, crowding her space again. The danger still radiated off him, a residual heat from the violence at the door. Listen to me carefully, Vivian. In my world, perception is reality. If the street thinks I let a lowlife like Penhaligon threaten what is mine, I look weak. And if I look weak, my enemies will tear down everything my family built. Until the ink dries on our divorce papers, you are a Volkov, and no one touches a Volkov without my permission. He reached out, his large hand gently tilting her chin up, so she had to look him in the eye. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he'd just inflicted. You are safe, not because I care about you, but because my ego demands it. Do you understand? Vivian swallowed hard, staring into those frozen ocean eyes. It was the most terrifying reassurance she had ever received. I understand. Good. He released her and stepped back, wincing slightly. His hand went to his side. Vivian was instantly in doctor mode. You're bleeding again. I ripped a stitch when I hit the door, he muttered, annoyed by his own frailty. Sit on the couch, she ordered, grabbing her medical bag from under the sink. The wild animal needs muzzling again. Nikolai let out a short chuckle, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. Careful, doctor. I might bite back. The couch was a disaster. At 6'4", Nikolai Volkov did not fit on a piece of furniture designed for a small apartment in the 1970s. His feet hung over one armrest, his head propped awkwardly on the other. It was 3 a.m. The apartment was dark, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the thin curtains. Vivian lay in her bed in the other room, the door slightly ajar. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the crunch of Barry's wrist. She was lying in her childhood bed, in an apartment that smelled like a past, but there was a mafia don sleeping 10 feet away. The absurdity of it threatened to make her hysterical. Yesterday, her biggest problem was paying the electric bill and dodging Salvatore. Today, she was worth $10 million and married to the devil. She heard Nikolai shift, the old springs of the couch groaning in protest. A muffled curse in Russian followed. She got up, pulling on an old robe, and padded into the living room. Nikolai was sitting up, rubbing his neck. His shirt was off, revealing a torso that looked like it was carved from marble, marred only by the fresh white bandage on his side, and a tapestry of ink depicting Orthodox crosses, stars on his knees, and a large wolf across his back. Uncomfortable? She asked softly. He looked up, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. This couch is a hate crime against posture. It was free on Craigslist. She went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, handing him one. He took it, their fingers brushing. His skin was hot. You have a fever, she said, automatically reaching to check his forehead. He caught her wrist before she could touch him. His grip was firm, warning. I'm fine. It's just the body reacting to the trauma. I've had worse. She pulled her hand back. Right, rule 2, don't ask. She sat in the rickety wooden chair opposite the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. Barnaby jumped into her lap, purring like a small engine. Why did you really agree to this? Nikolai asked suddenly, watching her stroke the cat. 10 million is a lot of money, but you don't strike me as greedy. You struck me as desperate. You met Salvatore, she said. Penhaligon gave me until Friday. After that, he said I could work off the debt in one of his clubs overseas. I was going to run again. Change my name. Move to Nebraska, maybe? Running is exhausting, Nikolai observed. Eventually you have to turn and fight. Easy for you to say. You have an army. I have a scalpel and a grumpy cat. Nikolai smiled. A real smile this time, not a smirk. It transformed his face, making him look younger, almost approachable. You'd be surprised what a person can do with a scalpel when they are backed into a corner. You handled yourself well tonight. Most civilians would have been screaming. I'm not exactly a civilian, she murmured, looking down. My father. He wasn't just a gambler. He ran numbers for the Irish mob in Boston before he drank himself to death. I grew up knowing how to pack a go-bag in under 5 minutes. Nikolai nodded slowly. So the vet is also a stray. That explains why you didn't flinch when I bled on your floor. He finished his water and set the glass on the floor. Go to sleep, Vivian. Tomorrow, the real work begins. We have to convince Chicago that the great Nikolai Volkov has fallen desperately in love with a humble veterinarian. How do we do that? He laid back down, trying to find a comfortable spot on the lumpy cushions. Simple. We lie. We lie with every look, every touch, every breath. We put on the greatest show on earth until midnight on my birthday. And then I set you free. Vivian went back to her room, but sleep still didn't come easily. She kept thinking about his words. Until the ink dries on our divorce papers, you are a Volkov. She felt safer than she had in 3 years, and that frightened her more than Penhaligon ever could, because feeling safe with Nikolai Volkov was like feeling safe cuddling a loaded grenade. The morning sun was brutal, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the cramped apartment. Vivian woke up to the smell of strong coffee and something else. Something expensive, leather, and citrus. She walked out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. The kitchen was transformed. The dirty dishes were gone. The counter was wiped clean. On the small, wobbly kitchen table sat a silver tray with pastries that looked like they cost more than her weekly grocery budget, a ceramic French press, and 2 delicate china cups that definitely didn't belong to her. Nikolai was leaning against the counter, drinking coffee. He was wearing a fresh navy suit, impeccably tailored, that made the apartment look even shabbier by contrast. "Good morning, wife," he said briskly. He gestured to the table. "Eat. We have a busy schedule." "Son." Vivian stared at the spread. Where did all this come from? Alexei dropped it off, along with these. He pointed to several large black garment bags hanging on the back of the front door. "What are those?" "Your costume for Act 1. He looked her up and down, his gaze clinical, appraising. "The whole starving student look is charming, Vivian, but the wife of the Pakhan does not wear sweatpants with holes in the knees." Vivian felt a flash of defensiveness. "These are comfortable?" "Comfort is a luxury. Appearance is a weapon. Today we are going to lunch at the Drake Hotel. We will be seen by gossip columnists, rivals, and my uncle's spies. You need to look like a woman who has captured my attention, not my charity case." He walked over to the bags and unzipped the first one, revealing a cream-colored cashmere wrap dress. "Get dressed. Alexei is waiting downstairs. It's showtime." "No." Viviana looked at the dress, then at the man who was upending her life with terrifying efficiency. She grabbed a croissant from the silver tray. It tasted like butter and heaven, and headed for the bathroom. "Fine," she called over her shoulder, "but I'm keeping the sweatpants." The flashbulbs erupted the moment the armored SUV pulled up to the curb of the Drake Hotel. It was a chaotic staccato of white light that blinded Vivian even through the tinted windows. "Who told them we were coming?" Vivian asked, her hands instinctively clutching the cream cashmere of her dress. "I did," Nikolai said calmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside sat a diamond the size of a quail egg, set in platinum. It was heavy, ostentatious, and undeniably real. "Give me your hand." Vivian hesitated. "Is this a prop?" "Everything is a prop, Vivian. The suit, the car, the smile. But the ring is real. It belonged to my mother. If you lose it, I will be very upset." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. His hand lingered on hers, warm and rough against her smooth skin. For a second, the air in the car felt thin. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He opened the door, and the noise of the city rushed in. Nikolai stepped out first, buttoning his jacket, then turned and offered his hand to her. As Vivian stepped onto the sidewalk, the cameras went wild. "Mr. Volkov, is it true?" "Who is she? Look at the ring." Nikolai didn't answer. He simply placed a protective arm around Vivian's waist, pulling her flush against his side, and guided her through the revolving doors into the gilded lobby. The transition was jarring. 1 second, the chaotic noise of the street. The next, the hushed, polite murmur of Chicago's elite. The maitre d', a man named Pierre, who looked like he ironed his socks, bowed low. "Mr. Volkov, your usual table in the Palm Court." "Thank you, Pierre." They were led to a corner table, secluded by lush ferns but visible enough to be noticed. This was a power move. Nikolai wanted to be seen. As they sat, Vivian noticed the stares. Women in Chanel suits looked at her with undisguised jealousy and confusion. Men looked at Nikolai with fear. "Smile," Nikolai murmured, picking up the menu. "You look like you're waiting for a firing squad. You're supposed to be in love." Vivian forced a smile, leaning across the table. "I'm contemplating stabbing you with a dessert fork. Does that count as passion?" Nikolai's lips curved. "It counts as foreplay in my family." They ordered tea and sandwiches. Nikolai played the part of the doting husband perfectly. He poured her tea. He brushed a stray hair from her face. His touch was electric, confusing Vivian's nervous system. Was this the act? Or was the man who slept on her lumpy couch bleeding through the mask? Well, I didn't believe the rumors. The voice was like oil slick over gravel. Vivian looked up to see a man standing at their table. He was older than Nikolai, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the cruel set of his mouth. He wore a suit that cost more than Vivian's entire education. Nikolai didn't stand. He didn't even stop buttering his scone. "Uncle Sergei, I'd invite you to sit, but we're celebrating." Sergei Volkov's eyes narrowed, but he kept his smile fixed. He turned his gaze to Vivian. It felt like being scanned by a predator, and this must be the lucky woman, Sergei said. "I must say, Nikolai, you've surprised us all. We expected a merger with the senator's family. Instead, you bring us— Who exactly are you, my dear?" "Vivienne," she said, her voice steady, despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Vivienne," Sergei repeated, tasting the name. "I don't recall a Vivian in the social register. Where did you meet my nephew? The opera? The gala circuit?" "We met at my work," Vivian lied smoothly. "Ah, and what do you do? Hedge funds? Real estate?" "I'm a veterinarian," she said. Sergei laughed. It was a condescending, barking sound. "A vet? Nikolai, you married the help? I suppose she's good with animals. Fitting, given your temper." He looked back at Vivian, his eyes hard. "My dear, this world, it eats soft things. You might be used to fixing broken puppies, but the wolves in this city don't heal. They just bite until you stop moving." The insult was clear. "You don't belong here. You are weak." Nikolai's hand clenched around his napkin, his knuckles turning white. But before he could speak, Vivian set her teacup down on with a sharp clink. "You're right, Mr. Volkov," Vivian said, her voice projecting clearly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I am used to broken puppies, but you'd be surprised how similar the two worlds are. In my clinic, the loudest, most aggressive dogs are usually the ones compensating for fear. They bark and snap because they know they're old and losing their territory." She smiled, sweet and sharp as a razor. "I'm very good at putting old dogs down when they become a liability." The silence at the table was absolute. Sergei's smile vanished. His face went a mottled shade of red. He looked at Vivian, then at Nikolai, who was watching his wife with an expression of stunned admiration. "Enjoy your lunch," Sergei hissed. "I'll see you at the board meeting, Nikolai. Alone." He spun on his heel and marched away. Nikolai let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. He looked at Vivian, his eyes dancing with dark amusement. "Remind me," he whispered, leaning in close, "never to get on your bad side." "Too late," she replied, taking a sip of tea. "You're living in my apartment." The adrenaline crash hit Vivian hard on the ride back. The high of verbally sparring with a mafia boss faded, leaving her exhausted. Nikolai was quiet, staring out the window, his hand resting absently on his side. When they arrived back at the crumbling apartment building on 4th Street, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the brickwork. "Alexei," Nikolai said as the car idled, "stay parked down the block. Watch the entrance." "Boss, you look pale," Alexei noted, frowning in the rearview mirror. "Maybe we go to the safe house? The medical bay?" "No, we stick to the plan. If I vanish to a safe house, Sergei spins the narrative that I'm weak or dying. I need to be seen coming home to my wife." They walked up the 4 flights of stairs. By the 3rd flight, Vivian noticed Nikolai was leaning heavily on the banister. His breathing was shallow. "Nico?" she asked, using the nickname without thinking. "I'm fine," he grunted. They made it inside the apartment. As soon as the door locked, the facade crumbled. Nikolai swayed and collapsed onto the beige couch, his knees giving out. "Nikolai!" Vivian dropped her purse and rushed to him. His skin was burning hot. She cursed under her breath and shoved him back against the cushions. "Let me see." She unbuttoned his shirt. The bandage she had applied last night was soaked through with yellow and red fluid. The area around the wound was angry and swollen. Infection. It was moving fast, too fast. "You pushed it too hard," she scolded, her voice rising with panic. "I told you to rest. I had to mark my territory," he slurred, his eyes glassy. "Sergei needed to see. Sergei won't matter if you die of sepsis in a walk-up in South Chicago. Stay awake." Vivian scrambled for her bag. She needed antibiotics, stronger ones than she had on hand. She had a stash of emergency meds at the clinic downstairs. "I have to go down to the clinic," she said, grabbing her keys. "I need ceftriaxone and saline. Don't move. Vivian!" His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was weak, trembling. "Don't go. Not safe." "You have a fever of at least 103. I'm going. I'll be 3 minutes." She broke his grip and ran. The run downstairs was a blur. She unlocked the clinic, grabbed the vials, IV bags, and a fresh suture kit. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was cold, clinical. She was a doctor. This was a patient. It didn't matter that he was a criminal. It didn't matter that he was her husband. She ran back up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. When she burst back into the apartment, Nikolai was shivering violently, his teeth chattering. "Okay, this is going to be cold," she warned, hooking the IV bag onto the darkest, tallest lamp she could find. A floor lamp she dragged over to the couch. She inserted the cannula into his vein with practiced ease. The fluid started to flow. Next, she injected the antibiotics. Finally, she stripped off his ruined shirt and began to clean the wound again. "Talk to me," she ordered as she worked, trying to keep him conscious. "Tell me why." "Why what?" he rasped, his eyes closed. "Why the deadline? Why did you need a wife yesterday? Why not a week ago?" Nikolai let out a shuddering breath. "My grandfather. Old school. He wrote the trust. He didn't trust me. Thought I was too wild, too violent. Said a man without a family is a man with nothing to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is dangerous to business." He winced as she debrided the wound. "So he put a clause, 30th birthday. If I am not married, the control goes to Sergei. And Sergei, he will sell us out to the Bratva in Moscow. He will bring drugs into the neighborhoods. I keep the drugs out." Vivian paused, holding a piece of bloody gauze. She looked at him. He was a killer, yes, a criminal, yes. But he had a code. He was holding back a tide of something worse. "And the previous fiancé?" she asked softly. "Sergei got to her," Nikolai murmured, his voice fading as the fever and the drugs began to pull him under. Not rehab. Threats. She ran. He opened his eyes, the grey now clouded with delirium. He looked at her, really looked at her. You didn't run. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. No, he said, his hand clumsily finding hers again. You stayed. You fought him today. You are a wolf, Vivian. My wolf. He passed out. Viviana sat on the floor beside the couch for hours, monitoring his vitals, changing cold compresses on his forehead. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Nikolai's ragged breathing. Around 2 a.m., his fever broke. He fell into a deeper, more natural sleep. Vivian finally exhaled. She stood up to stretch her aching back. She walked to the kitchen counter to pour a glass of water. Her phone, sitting on the counter, buzzed. It was a text message. Unknown number. She picked it up, expecting it to be a wrong number or maybe an alert from the clinic security system. It was a picture. Vivian's blood turned to ice. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It showed a small yellow house with white shutters. A woman with hair like Vivian's was walking out the front door, carrying a bag of groceries. It was her sister, Sarah, in Vermont. Sarah had been safe. Sarah was supposed to be a ghost. No one knew where she was. Vivian had burned every paper trail. A second text bubble appeared below the photo. A pretty wife makes for a weak husband. You made a fool of Mr. Volkov today at lunch. If you want Sarah to keep breathing, you will leave the apartment door unlocked tonight. We are coming to finish the job. Vivian dropped the phone. It clattered onto the counter. She looked at the door. Then she looked at the couch, where Nikolai lay unconscious, hooked up to an IV, unable to lift a finger to help her. They weren't coming for her debt. They were coming to kill Nikolai while he was weak, and they were using her sister as leverage to get her to open the door. Vivian looked at the knife block on the counter. She looked at Nikolai's gun, still sitting on top of the fridge. She picked up the phone and typed a reply. Come and get him. Then she walked over to the door, slid the chain lock off, and turned the deadbolt to open. She walked back to the kitchen, climbed onto the counter, and took the Sig Sauer from the top of the fridge. She checked the magazine. Full. She sat in the wooden chair facing the door, the gun heavy in her hand, Barnaby the cat weaving anxiously around her ankles. She wasn't going to let them kill him, and she wasn't going to let them touch Sarah. Tonight, the vet was going to have to put down some rabid animals. The apartment was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic drip of the IV bag fluid and the rasp of Nikolai's breathing. It was 3:14 a.m. Vivian sat in the hard wooden chair, positioned in the shadows of the kitchenette. Her hands were sweating around the grip of the Sig Sauer P226. It was heavier than the revolvers her father had taught her to shoot with when she was a teenager, but the mechanics were the same. Sight. Breath. Squeeze. She stared at the door. The deadbolt was disengaged. To an outsider, it looked like a mistake. To the men coming up the stairs, it would look like an invitation. Barnaby, usually a coward, was pacing anxiously near the window, his ears swiveled back. He heard them before she did. Soft footsteps. Not the heavy clatter of boots, but the muted squeak of rubber soles on the linoleum hallway. They stopped outside 4B. Vivian raised the gun, resting her elbows on her knees to steady her shaking hands. Don't shoot until you see them. Don't miss. The doorknob turned slowly. The latch clicked. The door creaked open, pushing into the dark room. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, tall, wearing a balaclava, holding a suppressed pistol. He stepped in, scanning the room. He looked towards the couch where Nikolai lay defenseless. He raised his weapon. Vivian didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She just squeezed. Crack. The gunshot was deafening in the small concrete box. The muzzle flash blinded her for a split second. The intruder jerked violently, clutching his shoulder, and spun around. He hadn't expected a shooter in the corner. He fired blindly in her direction. A bullet shattered the glass of the microwave next to her head, showering her in sparks and plastic shards. "Check the corner," the man screamed, dropping to one knee. A second man surged through the door, low and fast, aiming a tactical shotgun. Vivian fired again. 2 rapid shots. One went wide, embedding itself in the doorframe. The other hit the second man in the thigh. He grunted, stumbling, but didn't go down. He leveled the shotgun at her. She pumped the trigger again. Click. She had forgotten to rack the slide after the first malfunction. Or maybe she was out. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her throat. The man with the shotgun grinned beneath his mask. "Good try, bitch." He racked his shotgun. Bang. The sound didn't come from Vivian, and it didn't come from the shotgun. It came from the couch. The man with the shotgun's head snapped back as if he'd been punched by an invisible giant. He crumpled to the floor, a dark hole in the center of his forehead. Vivian spun her head. Nikolai was sitting up. He looked like death, sweat-drenched, pale, the IV line pulled taut, but his hand was rock steady. He was holding a small, snub-nosed backup revolver he must have had ankle-holstered. The first attacker, the one Vivian had shot in the shoulder, scrambled for his dropped pistol with his good arm. "Don't," Nikolai rasped. The man froze. He looked at Nikolai, then at the dead body of his partner. "Who sent you?" Nikolai asked. His voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it carried the authority of a gravestone. The assassin hesitated. "Sergei, he said you were already dead." He was misinformed. Nikolai fired. The second man slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. Silence returned to the apartment, heavier than before. The smell of cordite and blood was overpowering. Vivian dropped the gun. It clattered on the floor. She couldn't breathe. Her hands were trembling so violently she had to grip her own knees to stop them. "Vivian!" She looked up. Nikolai was trying to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. He slid off the couch to the floor, ripping the IV out of his arm in the process. Blood welled up on his forearm. "Nico!" She scrambled over to him, sliding through the shattered glass on the floor. She grabbed his face. "You idiot! You ripped the line!" "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes frantically scanning her for bullet holes. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. "Did they hit you?" No, I'm fine. Just glass." Nikolai exhaled, a sound that was half groan, half sob. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. He was burning up, his heart hammering against her own. "You left the door open," he whispered into her hair. "Why? They had Sarah," she choked out, the tears finally spilling over. "They sent a photo. They said if I locked the door, they'd kill her. So I opened it, and I waited." Nikolai pulled back, looking into her eyes. The ice in his grey gaze had melted into something fierce, something raw. "You used yourself as bait," he said, realization dawning on him, "to save your sister and to save me." "I couldn't let them kill you while you were sleeping," she said fiercely, wiping her eyes with blood-stained hands. "You're my husband, even if it's fake." Nikolai stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and wiped a smudge of gunpowder from her cheek with his thumb. "It is not fake," he said hoarsely. "Not anymore." He looked at the bodies on the floor, then at the phone on the counter. "Give me the phone." Vivian handed it to him. He looked at the photo of Sarah. His jaw tightened until a vein pulsed in his temple. He dialed a number. "Alexei," Nikolai said, "bring the cleanup crew to 4th Street, now, and send the ghost unit to Vermont. Address enclosed. Secure the target. If anyone gets within a mile of that house, kill them." He hung up and looked at Vivian. "Your sister is safe. My best men are on their way. No one will touch her." Vivian nodded, believing him. She slumped against the couch, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. "What do we do now? We can't stay here." "No," Nikolai said, struggling to sit up straighter. "We are done hiding. Today is my birthday. Today is the vote. Yen." He looked at the cheap plastic clock on the wall. 4:30 a.m. "Help me up, Vivian. We have a board meeting to crash." The penthouse at Volkov Tower was a fortress of glass, a stark contrast to the bloody apartment they had fled. By 11 a.m., the transformation was complete. The wounded animal was gone. The king had returned. Nikolai stood before the mirror, buttoning a black shirt over his fresh bandages. He was pale, fueled only by painkillers and rage, but he looked lethal. Vivian stepped out of the walk-in closet, wearing a sharp white power suit she'd found in the racks Nikolai had stocked. She looked like armor. White, Nikolai noted, adjusting his cuffs. Bold choice for a funeral. "Who's dying?" she asked, fixing his collar. "Sergei's career," he replied grimly. "Are you ready?" "I shot a man last night, Nico," she said, smoothing her lapels. "I think I can handle a board meeting." The boardroom was silent. 12 men sat around the mahogany table. At the head, Uncle Sergei checked his watch with a smug smile. "Gentlemen, it is 12:05 p.m., Sergei announced. "My nephew is absent. Per the trust, leadership passes to the next of kin." He stood up, feigning regret. "It brings me no joy." The double doors slammed open. "You're late, Uncle," Nikolai boomed, striding in with Vivian on his arm. "And your watch is fast." He pointed to the wall clock, which Alexei had set back 5 minutes. It read 11:58. The room gasped. Nikolai didn't look like a dying man. He looked like a predator. He pulled out a chair for Vivian at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, meet Vivian Volkov." "My wife," Nikolai said, slamming a folder onto the table, "and under Clause 14b, my legal proxy during my medical recovery from a stomach flu." Sergei turned purple. "This is a sham. I'll have this marriage annulled. I'll prove it's fake." "Actually," Vivian interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. She placed a protective hand on her stomach and smiled shyly at the board. "We have an announcement. We're expecting." The room erupted in cheers. "A Volkov heir!" Nikolai froze, staring at her. It was the perfect lie. A pregnant wife couldn't be divorced, and a Volkov heir secured the dynasty forever. Sergei slumped into his chair, defeated. He couldn't touch a pregnant woman without starting a war he would lose. Nikolai squeezed her hand under the table. "You are insane," his eyes said. "I'm improvising," she signaled back. In the private elevator ride down to the garage, the adrenaline finally crashed. "Pregnant?" Nikolai whispered, leaning against the mirrored wall. "Vivian, do you realize what you did? We can't divorce in a year now. You just bound us together for life." "I know," she said calmly. "Why?" "Because I checked the accounts this morning," she admitted. "You paid off Penhaligon's debt at 9 a.m. Before the attack. Before I saved you." She stepped closer to him. "You're not a monster, Nico. You're just a man with too many enemies. And I realized last night, I'm better at fighting enemies than I thought." Nikolai boxed her in against the wall, his eyes dark with intensity. "You are dangerous. You are reckless. And you are a terrible liar. I fooled the board. You didn't fool me." He kissed her then, possessive, hungry, and real. It wasn't a performance. It was a seal on a new contract. When they broke apart, breathless, Nikolai rested his forehead against hers. "Sergei is being handled," he murmured. "It's over." The elevator doors opened. "So," Nikolai said, lacing his fingers through hers. "Back to the penthouse?" "No," Vivian smiled, pulling him towards the car. "Back to the apartment. I forgot to feed the cat." The Mafia King groaned. "I hate that cat." "He hates you too, darling," she laughed. "But he's family now." From a cold metal table in a veterinary clinic to the throne of the Chicago underworld, Nikolai and Vivian proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a woman with nothing to lose and a man with everything to protect. They started as a business transaction, but they ended as a dynasty. What did you think of Vivian's final power move in the boardroom? Was the fake pregnancy genius or a recipe for disaster? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss a new drama. Share this video with a friend who loves a good enemies to lovers twist. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.